And I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to begin by thanking the Undersecretary General, Mr. Mark Lowcock, for the comprehensive and informative briefing. We concur with the fact that the most difficult humanitarian and military situation continues to be observed in the areas on the east bank of the Euphrates River, which is not under the control of the Syrian government, in the Idlib de-escalation zone and the U.S.-occupied area around Tanf. In the statements of our distinguished colleagues, we heard many fair, critical assessments regarding the situation in northeast Syria. We wish to recall the fact that the issues in the northeast of the country did not arise yesterday, and the creators of these problems are neither the Syrian government, nor Russia, nor Turkey. The root cause for destabilization in the area beyond the Euphrates largely is the illegal occupation of that area and the perilous demographic engineering experiment, which was introduced in the area to spite the Syrian government. The achievement of a lasting, long-term stabilization in the Syrian Arab Republic on the whole is only possible provided there be respect for that country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Syria needs to immediately be liberated from the illegitimate foreign military presence, even if at stake is a resource that is so important to our U.S. colleagues, namely oil. This oil does not belong to you, it belongs to Syrians, in whose eyes the acts undertaken by the United States amounts to looting and plunder. The restoration to Syria of oil fields will incidentally be a meaningful contribution by the United States towards humanitarian assistance efforts for the people of that country. To the extent that it has been possible, the Russian Federation has been striving to address and alleviate the situation and to avert a humanitarian disaster and the deaths of civilians, thanks to the fact that on 22 October in Sochi, a Russo-Turkish memorandum was signed. The situation in northeast Syria was brought under control. The Russian military police has undertaken joint patrols in area along the border on border crossings that were agreed to with the Syrian government troops, and Kurdish self-defense units have withdrawn. Now turning to the Idlib de-escalation zone. In the statements that have been delivered, once again, we did not hear, or we did not clearly hear, what is most important. This area remains a hotbed of international terrorism. For this very reason, the head of ISIL, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, hid himself in Idlib province, and the so-called international coalition even had to previously conduct strikes against that area. We see that our colleagues are increasingly persuaded of the fact that it is controlled by terrorists who are holding civilians as human shields. Madam President, at the same time, the fighters continue to engage in provocations and to bombard government troops. In October alone, there were some 600 such attacks reported. And on 11 to 12 November, one of the largest bombardments was carried out targeting Tel Turk, Madaya, Houvain, and other areas in southern Idlib. On 10 November, residential areas of Aleppo were shelled, as a consequence of which a child died. Dozens of individuals were wounded. There are reports about executions, detentions, and violent dispersals of individuals demonstrating against people who against the terrorists who have sought power in Idlib, and Mark Lowcock has mentioned this. The fact that these crimes are being swept under the rug, in our view, is an attempt to once again separate the terrorists into good and bad ones, regardless of these groups' names. ISIL, Jabhat al-Nusra, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Once again, we caution against playing into the hands of jihadists for the advancement of short-term goals. We caution against providing them with political cover, against the provision of financial and logistical support to them, and against especially portraying them as moderate radicals. Unfortunately, today, once again, we heard accusations that the Syrian army and allies conducted airstrikes targeting civilian facilities in Idlib. As it became clear to us from other media outlets, the source of this information, once again, were the woefully notorious white helmets. We spoke at length and in detail about the issues of veracity of what is introduced in media outlets and then taken up and circulated by Security Council colleagues. This information. On 16 September, we conducted a detailed press conference on the basis during which, on the basis irrefutable evidence, we pointed to the fact that the most high-profile alleged incident of Russian and Syrian Air Force strikes against civilian facilities in Idlib, in fact, was fake. However, as is seen in the statements delivered by a number of our distinguished colleagues, this information was disregarded. Of course, it is far more convenient to merely vociferate about humanitarian problems in Syria, failing to take action to salvage individuals from the hands of terrorists. For our part, we continue to engage with OCHA to remedy the humanitarian situation, including to fine-tune and improve the efforts of the deconfliction mechanism. The existing problems in this mechanism is something which we already spoke of. We welcome the fact that the presence of errors was acknowledged. We hope these are inadvertent errors in the handover of the coordinates and description of alleged civilian facilities, which, when verified, turned out to be strongholds of fighters where they were taking cover. Against this backdrop, we note with satisfaction that OCHA intends to revisit the methodology for the collection of data on the deconfliction mechanism. This is a step in the right direction. We concur with the concerns voiced today vis-à-vis the uptick in the terrorist threat in various parts of Syria, which for the moment are not under Syrian government control. We urge those who've created and maintained the prisons in the northeast of the country for them not to pin responsibility on others to prevent jihadists of all stripes spilling over throughout the region. Madam, the Russian Federation, together with the government of Syria, is adopting measures to set the stage for the return of refugees and internally displaced persons. To date, nearly 2 million Syrian civilians have already returned to their homes. Of them, more than 1,300,000 are internally displaced persons. 914 educational and 212 medical institutions have been rebuilt. And electricity and water supply facilities are being rebuilt, as are industrial enterprises. These irrefutably attest to the fact that the Syrian government has been adopting measures to create the necessary conditions for the voluntary, dignified, and safe return of refugees. We call upon international organizations, including the United Nations Office for Refugees and other humanitarian bodies, to step up their efforts to that end. Unfortunately, we see that at times this activity is artificially being delayed and obstructed. With assistance provided by the Russian Center for the Reconciliation of Opposing Sides and the Syrian government, alongside the United Nations and the International Red Cross Committee, efforts are underway to resettle individuals from the Rukban camp. However, due to the intent of armed groups in the area, their intent to maintain control of the area, these efforts are being stymied. We trust that the issues of refugees and IDPs there will be expeditiously resolved. Turning to Al-Hol camp, the situation there is truly disastrous due to limited access for humanitarian bodies and a lack of financing.
Wrapping up, please, because it has now been nearly 10 minutes. Thank you.
Я уже заканчиваю.
I am concluding, madam. Everything has worsened in connection with the fact that a large number of refugees from other camps in the northeast has turned to the area. Half of the people in the area are women and children. It is past time to consider the transfer of the illegitimately occupied territories to Syrian authorities to address the issues of IDPs. There remains an acute issue of mine clearance. We welcome the beginning of efforts by the United Nations Mine Action Service in Syria. The Russian Federation is engaged in efforts for mine clearance both in our national capacity and in contributions to the service. In this connection, we urge all parties who genuinely wish to ensure that there be humanitarian well-being in Syria to join these efforts and to join efforts on other humanitarian fronts and to deliver assistance to all Syrian people without discrimination, politicization, nor any preconditions. This also includes not merely projects for post-conflict rebuilding in the country, but it also includes the lifting of unilateral sanctions to normalize the lives of Syrians. To conclude, Madam, I wish to stress the following. Despite the myriad factors and the outbreaks of tension, the situation in Syria continues to normalize. Above all, owing to the gradual transfer of growing swaths of territory under the control of the legitimate government. One of the positive factors was the fact that on 30 October in Geneva, the Constitutional Committee on Syria began its work. The inception of this body and at the beginning of its work with the assistance of the Astana format was certainly an important achievement for the Syrian people. We value the first round of intra-Syrian dialogue, the aim of which is to determine the future of the country. As a guarantor country for the Astana process, as guarantor countries, Russia, Turkey, and Iran stand ready to continue to provide assistance to the Syrian stakeholders and the special envoy, Mr. Peterson, to expeditiously resolve and politically resolve the Syrian conflict. The situation on the ground should not impact on the works of the committee. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement.